This is the Arduino IDE, which stands for Integrated Development Environment. And this is where you're going to type in your programs and have the compiler translate them and upload them into the Arduino. Okay, so to begin with, when you launch the IDE, you're going to see this void setup and void loop. We'll talk about what the void means later, but basically the setup is where you put your code in that you want to only execute once. The code in the loop runs over and over again, and you'll see what I'm talking about in a minute. Okay, so the first thing that we want to do is what we're trying to do is to make this little LED on your Arduino board itself blink. And that LED is connected to port 13 on the Arduino. So the first thing we have to do is to configure that port as an output port. And this is something that we only do once, and so therefore it goes in the setup. Okay, the way we do that is we type pin, capital M-O-D-E, pin mode. Notice it turns orange to indicate the compiler recognizes that instruction. 13 is the port number, and then I'm going to type output to configure it as an output port. Notice, again, it highlights that in blue. It recognizes that instruction as well. Okay, now in C, after every instruction, you have to put a semicolon. Okay, that's probably going to drive you crazy for a while because you're going to forget to do it. It's going to generate an error, but it's just something you have to get used to. Okay, so that's done. Now, in the loop, the first thing we want to do is to turn the LED on. And the way we do that is we type digital, capital W, right? Again, the port number 13, and this time high. And what that does, it's going to force 5 volts to occur at port 13. Okay, that's going to be sufficient voltage to turn the LED on. Now, we want it to stay on for a second, so I'm going to put a delay and 1,000. Now, the number inside the parentheses here is going to control how long that delay is, but the number is interpreted as being in milliseconds. So since a millisecond is 1,000th of a second, if I say delay 1,000, that's going to cause a delay of 1 second and a semicolon. All right, now you can put comments in your code, which is basically just little notes to yourself that are ignored by the compiler. And you can do this by using a double backslash. So I'm going to put a little comment in here that's going to say delay for 1 second. Okay, now I want the LED to turn off. So I'm going to type digital right. Again, the port 13, but this time low, and that's going to make 0 volts to be presented at that port 13. And once again, delay 1,000. Okay, so that's it. So just to recap, the pin mode configures pin port 13 to be an output port. This puts 5 volts at that port to turn the LED on. This keeps it on for a second. This turns it off. and this keeps it off for a second. All right, I'm going to use one of these little tools up here. This one, which is verify, what that does is it compiles the program. All right, it's asking me if I want to save it. I don't want to do that, so I'm just going to cancel. Down here, you can see compiling the sketch. We get a couple of warnings, and then finally, we get a little note that's saying that everything worked okay, how many bytes it used, a little bit about variables. All right, I would just like to introduce an error in here just to show you what happens if I forget to put a semicolon there and I verify. And now I get an error here that says an expected semicolon before delay. Okay, so a lot of times these error messages are not that obvious. They're sometimes pretty cryptic. Okay, now this little tool over here is for uploading your code to the Arduino. Now, obviously, in order for you to do that, you've got to have the cable connected into the USB port of your computer, and then click upload, and again, prompting me to save, but it's going to compile the sketch once again, but this time you can see that it's uploading, and now it's finished uploading. Okay, now what I'd like to do is to show you in the simulation tool what this is going to look like. So, okay, this is the simulation tool. Again, there's a link to this. You have to create an account. But right over here, I'm going to hide the code in a minute. Here is the Arduino. There's components over here that we'll learn how to use in subsequent labs. All right, if I bring the code back up here, notice this is the exact same code as I had in the IDE. I'm going to start the simulation, and there's the little LED that's blinking right there. Okay, I'm going to stop the simulation. All right, I'm going to introduce a little change here. I want this LED to blink a little bit faster at half-second intervals. So I'll make this 500, and I'll make this 500. Start simulation again. And you'll notice now that the little LED is blinking twice as fast. Okay, let's just introduce an error here. Whoops. Got to stop simulation before I change anything. Okay, there's my error. If I start simulation, now it says, gives me a little message here that says, sorry, it seems like your code has some errors. And then down here, it gives you more information. Okay, so I'd like you to try this and get that little LED blinking on your Arduino.